points. So we've got an hour scheduled for the event. So as speakers, we're going to try and give you a good overview of our journeys to where we've got to today. We'll try and keep it as punchy as we can so that we're going to leave time for questions, because I think that's where we'll really get a rich dialogue going. So please put your questions in the chat as we go along. We'll try to answer as many as we can, but also if you feel able, then do ask in the Q&A at the end. We would also love to see your faces. So if you could turn your cameras on, that would be amazing. It's always much nicer for us as speakers if we can see who we're actually speaking to. So please do, if you feel able to do that. The session is being recorded. I've just noticed that that Sandra's already pressed the record button. So please make sure that you note that. And also, just finally, but not least, everyone that is presenting tonight is doing so from our own personal experience. So we're not representing the views of our organisations, and we won't be answering questions that are specific to our organisations for obvious reasons and their policies. So please bear that in mind when you're putting the questions through. So I'm going to say an added thanks to Ian, who worked hard on putting some slides together for us today. So thank you, Ian. And I think we probably can circulate those. Are you happy, Ian, for us to circulate after the event? That's good. I think there's some really important information on there. So I want to very briefly introduce everyone, but I'm not going to say too much because I'm going to ask them to speak about themselves, obviously, and their journeys when they give their presentations. But starting with Andrew de Coutros. So Andrew is currently employed by the Government Legal Division and primarily focused on immigration and public law cases. Ian Brooks-Howells is an insurance commercial lawyer from Lloyds Banking Group, and Jack Meek is also employed by the Government Legal Department. So I'm going to kick off the session personally with a little bit about my own background. So I think probably in comparison to a lot of my friends and peers at the self-employed bar, and I think this is probably fairly indicative of other paths within the employed bar sector, I've had quite a varied career and a varied pathway to get there. I think I would sum it up that pretty much everything I've done has come from a seed of, oh, that sounds quite interesting. I think I'll just kind of give it a go and see how things work out. And I think if we go right back to when I first started, so thinking about kind of social mobility as the theme here, after really struggling at a local primary school, and that was a comprehensive primary school, and really stuck for options. I think I was really fortunate that my parents, by dint of just working day in, day out, loads of jobs at once, very little in the way of holidays abroad, etc., to save money, they actually were able to, and I was lucky to be sent to a very small local private school. And it was a lovely school, and I'm really grateful for everything that it did for me, and it gave me a great grounding, but it was definitely not academic by today's standards. I understand it is much more now, so just a little bit of a caveat to that. And it was definitely not at the time, as far as girls were concerned, particularly very progressive at pushing vocational interests. But I did have, and I was lucky, I know, to have a really good English teacher who just happened to say, oh, you're pretty good at English. Why don't you think about doing something in the law space that you might find that interesting? So that's really how I started on my journey. I had no one really to guide me, no one to give me any advice. No one from my family had ever even thought about a tertiary level education. University was just unheard of in my little tiny small place in north of Manchester. And so my parents and I really kind of muddled through to figure out what it was we needed to do to get to university and what that pathway might look like. And I can contrast that now with my son's own university kind of journey and just how much education advice is given now, particularly in the private sectors. So it's quite important to think that, you don't have to go on this kind of big academic top tier Russell Group type journey from a school perspective to really start your own kind of journey into the law. So I applied to quite a few universities completely blindly. I mean, I had no idea really how to do it, where to look, what to do. And actually my predicted grades really let me down, and I ended up going through clearing ultimately, so I didn't really get the choice I wanted. I ended up being stuck at a university that I hadn't even looked at. I had no idea what kind of course it was going to provide, and just kind of decided to take that chance anyway, because it was the only option I had in reality. And actually, I really enjoyed my time, and that was where I started to get a little bit of guidance. And I think for me, that was what was really lacking, and whether it is still lacking now, I'm guessing it probably is, but from a social mobility perspective, and we're talking now in the 1990s, you know, no one had any guidance for me at all in terms of what to do and where to go and who to talk to. So that was a kind of real theme for me. And then from university, I felt like I applied for hundreds and hundreds of mini pupillages. I'm sure I didn't, but it felt like that. They were, again, much easier than they are now to get, because they're a little bit more work experience focused. And even now, work experience is really tough to get. You know, you have to go through a process. A lot of places will just not offer it. And I know that mini pupillages are very structured now too. But the one thing I didn't have the benefit of, and I think a lot of people now looking back at my cohort had, was that connection. So actually knowing someone that could help you and guide you and make introductions for you. And I really, looking back now, I think that was a big piece that was missing for me, and caused me a lot more strife than I really needed to go through. Again, I mean, going into those mini pupillages, it was, no one ever said to me during all those mini pupillages, have you ever thought about the employed bar? It was all about the self-employed bar, which I think is possibly still true now. It's been a while since I've spoken to someone who's done a mini pupillage, but I think that, you know, I still hear some of that. And I think that would have been good for me to know. And I think it would have made me feel a lot more comfortable knowing that I wasn't on this weird pathway, or I should be on some other pathway to get to a means to an end and be successful as a barrister. So again, I did pupillage. I was lucky enough eventually, after, again, lots and lots and lots of applications and years in the making. So I just kept going back. I had to get jobs in between because it was taking so long to find a pupillage, rejected all the time. You know, I had decided to come to London to do pupillage, which perhaps looking back wasn't so necessary. But every time I went to an interview, you know, a northern girl with bleached blonde hair sitting down in front of a panel of, you know, middle upper class, you know, white males at the time. No, it's very different now, but you know, and kind of looking down their glasses at me was really kind of tough to take. And it took a lot of tenacity and keep having to pick myself up and try again, to keep going with that. And I'm really glad I did, because after all of that and getting pupillages, that's when I finally, when I was in pupillage, managed to kind of start to see that there were other things out there, just by kind of talking to people, speaking to recruitment agencies, actually, because I didn't know that that was where I wanted to be long-term in chambers, and was lucky enough to get a job that came up in JP Morgan, which was fantastic and was a whole different world. It was a different language, it was a different arena. I didn't have a clue what anyone was talking about. I mean, this world of put and call options and numbers flying around that my mind just boggled at, was just incredible, really. But I'm glad that I did it and I took that chance. And then from there, my career has just been really moving from one bank to another, getting more senior, getting more experience, trying not to stay within one sector, although I have ended up back in foreign exchange. But I think that the real kind of message from me would be just keep trying and keep trying different things, because actually there is no one size fits all. And the self-employed bar is not necessarily, and is not the only path, but it's not necessarily the right path for everyone. And it might not be a place that you actually feel comfortable and enjoy. So do take those opportunities and keep trying, because there are opportunities out there, whatever your background. And I have a fantastic job now. I'm very lucky. I'm able to shape my team. I have a very diverse team of 15 that are kind of split across 2 jurisdictions, which is just fantastic. And I'm also on the executive management committee, and I'm a bencher at Grays. And so many good things have happened to me, and I'm extremely grateful for that. But I definitely had a non-traditional beginning as far as the bar is concerned. So please take heed from that it is possible. So I think I'm going to hand over now to Andrew, who's going to tell you about his journey.
Thank you so much, Dana. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the talk. It's so encouraging to see so many people here today. Part of the reason why we decided to give this talk is to talk about the fact that you don't need to go down the traditional route of going to a posh school and then going to a posh university and then getting pupillage the first year. That is the ideal. Everybody wants that. But the reality is not everyone does it that way. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I went to a comprehensive school in North London. My family couldn't speak English, so like many people whose parents are English as a second language, I had to do a lot of translating for people. I was often taken to doctor surgeries, to the council, to benefits agencies to help fill in forms. I was like 6 or 7 years old. And then as I became more and more experienced at translating, I started also adding bits of advice in. So somebody would ask me to go with them to the benefits agency because their income support had stopped, and I'd be able to tell them what other applications they can make while they're there. School wasn't a very pleasant time for me. I have dyslexia, I have ADHD, and I have anxiety, but none of that was disclosed. In those days, it wasn't a thing that people would get checked up on. So it just kind of went under the radar, really. I did A-levels at a local authority college called City in Islington, where I'm from. I wanted to be a doctor. I couldn't get into medical school. So I started looking around for other professions, and I thought, well, I definitely want to do something professional. And it just felt like law was the right decision for me at the time. So I started looking at universities. Of course, I don't have any money. My family doesn't have money. And it quickly became apparent that I'm going to have to work full time through university in order to support myself. I had missed the last UCAS application dates for law schools because I had used all my application spaces on medical school. Luckily, I managed to get a place at Queen Mary, a great university. I finished at Queen Mary and then went to UCL, where I did an LLM. After my LLM, I did the bar course at City. Since then, I've been involved in several different jobs until I found work at Government Legal. Now, the reason why I skip over a lot of that is because I spent 5 years not doing law stuff because I was looking for pupillage. I was doing what I can only call banging my head against a brick wall. I didn't know how to talk to people. I didn't know where to get pupillage from. I didn't know where pupillages were advertised. I didn't know any of that. I didn't know how to make my CV look good. I had nobody to mentor me. I had nobody to tell me, why don't you try tweaking your approach and doing this? And insofar as mini pupillages and shadowing, I had to work to support myself. I could not take a week out of my schedule to go and do mini pupillages and follow around barristers, or to go shadowing a judge, because I would have lost my daytime job, and then that would have been an even worse position. Randomly, I saw an advert for a university's day at Lincoln's Inn. This is probably something that still goes on at Lincoln's Inn. And I went there and I bumped into some people from Government Legal. And they said to me, where are you looking for pupillages? And I said to them, I'm looking in the Pupillage Gateway, and I'm looking at Chambers websites. And they said to me, well, why are you just restricting yourself to those? And I said, what do you mean? And they said to me, you know that the employed bar can also offer pupillages. And it really was like a complete change of belief for me. I had no idea that other places can offer pupillages. And when I did further research, I saw that banks can offer pupillages, law firms can offer pupillages. government departments, local authorities, charities, they can offer pupillages. And all of a sudden, this whole new world of possibilities was opened up to me. I made an application to Government Legal and I succeeded and got a pupillage with them. My first 6 months was in-house in their litigation department. That was my first 6 of pupillage. My second 6 was at 39 Essex Street, which is a commercial chambers. After I finished that, I worked at the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, and then I worked in the employment division of DEFRA. Then I got a request to move to the immigration department. I really didn't want to. I protested and they said to me, it will only be 1 year if you go. Well, that was 6 years ago. I've stayed in immigration. I don't know if that's by choice or because a choice was made for me. We started experimenting with conducting advocacy in-house. So up until the time that we started this thing, we would send all work for advocacy out to chambers. And even though we had fully fledged, fully qualified barristers and solicitors with higher rights in-house, we would pay external people to do it. And that removed a lot of the flexibility that we would have if we could do it ourselves. So a few barristers got together and we decided to set up the in-house advocacy programme. That's worked very, very well. We take pupils. I'm very, very privileged to say that Jack, who's going to be speaking in a little while, was one of the pupils that went through our system. And we conduct hearings in person. We send people from our group to go and do hearings, whereas in the past that was only private barristers. I've had the privilege as well of being made lead for advocacy, so I'm the lead trainer for Government Legal for barristers. Other than the advocacy side of work, I handle lots of quite high-profile cases. I've had a couple of cases in the Supreme Court, and I've had a lot of cases in the Court of Appeal and High Court. Lots of my cases have been published on Westlaw, which is a really big deal. And for the moment, at least, I don't really think I'm going to be leaving immigration, certainly for a couple of years. The one piece of advice that I would give everybody is don't look at what other people are doing. Look at your own path. You'll always hear people who will say to you, I've secured a pupillage, I've secured a mini pupillage, I'm shadowing the judge, I'm shadowing the Supreme Court, I'll be sitting in on whatever. But I can tell you that it makes no difference. Look at your own journey and focus on yourself. And when people try and say to you that you can't be a barrister, you must not listen to them. If you want to be a barrister and you've got what it takes, that's your decision and it's your perseverance that will make you a barrister. Everyone that you've heard from and will hear from shortly has had their own struggle. And I would say to you, a struggle does not mean it's impossible. So if you want to do it, you can do it.
Thank you, Andrew. I think we're going to move to Ian next.
Yes, good evening, everybody. Yeah, I was born in Wolverhampton to both parents who had left school during World War II at the age of 14. My father started his career as an electrician and then made his way up to be a procurement manager, and then he became a college lecturer in a college of further and higher education, but he never went to university and did all his education at night school, as it was called then. My mother was a housewife, leaving work in 1963 to have a family and choosing to be a stay-at-home mom. Because of that, we kind of were upper working class, lower middle class. We kind of had not much money around. We didn't go abroad for holidays. But, you know, we still had a very good life. None of my family were in the legal profession. And I went to state schools all the way through. And actually, it was when I was in class 7 of primary school, when I would probably be about 5 or 6, we did a play about Dr. Bernardo, who founded the charity to support children. And I was asked to play the part of a barrister in a court case. And the teacher even made a barrister's wig out of paper mache. and sort of a black curtain for a robe, and I thought this was amazing. So that always raised my interest. So actually from then on, I always wanted to be a barrister, all the way from primary school all the way through. But I don't think I was ever the brightest person. I think I was probably a bit lazy as well at school, but and constantly at school I was told, oh, so you can't possibly be a barrister at all. And I then went to a state comprehensive, and again I was advised it wasn't something possible, but I did my A levels. I didn't do quite as well as I should have done, and in those days, as well as applying through UCA for university places, everybody always applied to their local polytechnic as like an insurance policy of not getting your chosen place. So I got a place at my local polytechnic, but those 3 years of doing law I really enjoyed, had a really good time. And the good thing about what is now the University of Wolverhampton was they actually had a lot of lecturers who were barristers, and they actually encouraged us to consider the bar as well as being a solicitor. So about half my class went on to the Inns of Court School of Law to do the bar exams. They even ran a coach trip for us to go and tour the inns and choose which inn we wanted to join. And traditionally, people from Wolverhampton, for some reason, chose Middle Temple, which has always been a very good inn to me since then. So that was good. I then couldn't have, because in those days you actually got no income at all for your first 6 months pupillage. So I got a job in the legal department of a health authority as a legal assistant doing litigation, and that, as well as earning a salary, it also gave me great legal experience. And and my advice is, take an unqualified position in an in-house legal department. It will give you fantastic insight. It'll also help you to get in contact with people. So I was actually instructing barristers to appear for the authority in medical negligence and personal injury cases. I was appearing in the coroner's court and things, but I was also at the same time trying to get a pupillage, and it was very difficult. I think I probably did over 200 applications, and I'd got no idea. I didn't know anyone in barristers' chambers. No one to guide me as to what I should do or how to go about it. I had some appalling examples of how not to interview people. I remember driving for 5 hours to a provincial chambers, getting there and being confronted by the whole of the chamber's 22 members round one side of a table and me on the other. And to this day, I still don't know how I got on, because they never gave me feedback. Another time I went to one of the chambers in Fountains Court, Birmingham, and the head of chambers looked at my CV, got a sharpened pencil and kind of moved it away as if it was like covered in disease, and said to his colleagues, why did we bring someone from a polytechnic here? So, and another chambers gave me feedback that they didn't like my black suede shoes that I was wearing for the interview. So that was the sort of reception you got. Eventually, I got a first 6 months at East Anglian Chambers, but there again, I felt it very out of place, because most barristers were white male, been to public school, been to Oxbridge, Cambridge, Durham, and really didn't feel very comfortable because in those chambers. But I did my first 6 months. But in those days, BACFI in those days did help to facilitate commercial pupillages, and I was really fortunate to get a second 6 months with a barrister who was the in-house legal advisor to GEC Plessey Telecoms that manufactured telecommunications equipment. And the first day I walked into that role, I just absolutely loved it. No one ever asked me which school I went to, which university. All they were interested in was that I gave them legal advice and support. And I loved being part of something that actually didn't do law, but was making something, and it was fascinating to understand the business. So after that, they offered me a role as a commercial lawyer. And then after a couple of years, I moved on and worked for an IT company. And then I worked for BT, the telecommunications company, and got to the level of head of legal. And then they were offering voluntary redundancy, and I decided this was a good opportunity to become self-employed as a consultant. And I did a lot of interim work through a law firm called Pinson Masons. And then last year, the client that I was working for, Lloyds Banking Group, offered me a permanent position. And that's been a fantastic move. And this year, one of the great things about working in commerce finance industry is you get the chance to do different roles, not just legal. So when the opportunity of becoming the first inclusion and diversity manager for the legal department, I jumped at that, and I'm doing that part-time and doing my legal role part-time. So that's been really good. I've also over the years experienced homophobic bullying, both at school, but even working for some of the clients when I was a consultant. So you know, if there are challenges if you're not from a traditional background, but you've just got to keep persevering. And I think you've got to have a passion for what you want to do, because it does take a lot of energy and work to get your pupillage, to get to where you want to be, but also be very open-minded as to what you're offered. And sometimes you're offered positions which you wouldn't have thought of, but actually when you do it, you realize that you actually really enjoy it. So my tip is, you know, cast your net as wide as possible and seize every opportunity.
Very wise, Ian. Thank you. So last but not least, sorry, I'm getting a bit of an echo, hopefully you can hear me, is Jack. I'm going to hand over to you now.
Thank you, and hopefully I am an exception to T.S. Eliot's rule, and this won't end in a whimper. I feel always at these sorts of events that I should put my hands up at the beginning and acknowledge the fact that if you're looking at me, you probably think, oh, that's somebody that must tick all of the traditional boxes because it's a straight white male talking to you in these circumstances. But as you can perhaps hear from my accent, I'm originally from Northern Ireland. Say originally, but I'm from Northern Ireland. And I had never really thought about social mobility in my own personal context until it came to understanding the difficulties and the challenges that were involved in coming to the bar. And yes, I grew up always with an awareness that my family didn't have an awful lot of money to speak of, and I was the first generation in my family to go to university. But I was one of the lucky ones in the sense that I never had any doubt that I had a family and support around me that you know loved and provided the best that they could for me. And the attitude at home was always very much, if you are good enough, if you have the talent, and if you work hard enough, you can do anything. And that's probably not necessarily typical of what a lot of people that I grew up with were being told. And so it was always nice to know that. And I did therefore genuinely grow up having that self-belief, earned or otherwise, that if I wanted something, worked hard enough for it, didn't matter that I was from a background in a troubled part of the UK, where we didn't have an awful lot of money. Surely it's only right that if I work for something, that the rewards should come along. And of course, I was then disabused of that notion to some extent by having to put up with a lot of the challenges that came along the way. And similarly, it's not until recently that I've started to think about the different experiences that have informed my outlook on things. And it's not that these are conscious things, but subconsciously, the stuff that you just take in by osmosis, depending upon your background. And in a way, and I will get more to the substance of this, sort of my path in a moment, but in a way, whenever I moved across to what I refer to as the big island from the wee island, for the first time, sort of coming face to face with something that I associated with Dickens novels, this class divide, because I often joke that in Northern Ireland, you sort of the bigotry is right in your face. It comes down to sort of religion and politics, and where you stand. But to my mind, there was something, or there can be something that's almost insidious about this thing that's unspoken, the rules of society that are unspoken, that sort of filter you depending upon your class, and that never really sat right or sits right with me, because I genuinely don't think about myself in those terms, in terms of working class or middle class, because that just wasn't in the background where I was coming from the same way. And so then I started to think more consciously about, what are the things that have informed me? Because as many of you, I'm sure, will know, if you're applying for pupillage or have applied for pupillage in the past, you often get asked questions. Why do you want to be a barrister? That people are keen to explore your motivation, and for lots of us it may seem perfectly self-evident, but actually there is method to the madness in asking the question. And so whenever I think about the fact that my grandmother, for example, was a prison officer during the Troubles in Northern Ireland, and yet was really moderate in her outlook, and whenever she told us stories about people, IRA prisoners who were under her stewardship, she spoke about them not as terrorists or whatever other label you would want to use, depending upon the way you look at these things, but she talked about them as just ordinary people who had a different viewpoint and perhaps did some terrible things. And it's only within the past few years since she passed away that I've consciously thought about that sort of example. And my family have always been quite moderate in their political outlook, but acknowledging that there are two sides to an argument. And so whenever you grow up within a society where that sort of the politics and people arguing about something that's not always clear to others from the outside as to why that is, you do start to sort of explore, right, what is it that has that actually informed my approach? Is it because of the fact that I grew up in a place where you had to be careful about what you said in public for fear that you might offend somebody who had a different view? Was it just that sat so much against my own instincts that it's like, no, of course I must go into a profession where I can actually argue and advocate about hopefully the causes that are important to me. And so that's a bit of the background, and ultimately things had been going smoothly. In terms of my schooling in Northern Ireland, we don't really have public schools to speak of, and as I say, my family didn't have an awful lot of money, and so grammar school was sort of the route for a lot of people, and I was fortunate to attend a good grammar school, having transferred there at the age of 14 to do GCSEs and A-levels, before then studying at Queen's University Belfast, which is a Russell Group university. So again, I'm perhaps ticking some of the more traditional boxes, but ultimately then came to a decision. I knew that I wanted to become a barrister, and then it was weighing up, do I stay in Northern Ireland or do I come and try my hand over here? And ultimately I was thinking that there's more opportunity on what we deem the mainland. And if any of you seen recently the film Belfast, there's a line in it where one of the people is saying to another, the Irish were meant to leave, and there's a guilt also that sort of comes with that, but it's very much about you have to go and make things for yourself what you will. And so I came across here. I got called to the bar in 2013, but it was then 7 years between getting called to the bar and my starting pupillage. I had to get a dispensation from the pupillage rules so that I could start 2 years after the 5-year limit had ended. I should say I had secured pupillage with government in 2018, so within the 5 years. And I've calculated that over time, 6 years of applications, perhaps 100+ written applications, perhaps a score of interviews before finally getting taken on in government, which, by the way, was a place that I had always been looking at because of my interest in politics and how that engages with the law. But throughout all of that time, I had been getting different experiences, whether it was paralegaling or working for Thomson Reuters Practical Law. I did the New York bar. My Inn of Court, Lincoln's Inn, awarded me a scholarship to go and work at the European Court of Human Rights. And so I'm thinking, on paper, I'm doing all of the right things, and yet still nobody is willing to give me an opportunity. And of course, there are lots of brilliant people around, and perhaps there was something that was clearly lacking in the way I was presenting myself. But whenever you think you're doing all of the right things, it gets to the point where you can't help but ask yourself, is there something that is beyond my control here? Is it simply that I am unlucky by virtue of circumstance? And I don't want to claim, victimhood or say, but nobody needs to play, a small violin. For me, it has ultimately worked out. But this then all sort of led me to think, I am now in this position where I'm privileged to be in the job that I want to be in. And so the least I can do is actually now start talking about, the difficult journey that I had, so that other people hopefully can learn from it and have an easier path themselves. And if they don't have an easy path, then at least understand that, yes, things can ultimately work out. And absolutely, you should look at the other opportunities that are available. If all of what you understand about the bar is the self-employed bar, you're limiting your scope, not just for simply getting a pupillage, but actually doing really interesting work at the forefront of some really complex and interesting issues. And so I've come to this role as a social mobility advocate for the Bar Council because, without ever really having consciously thought it about myself, because I sort of always had faith that things tend to work out for the best. But then realizing that actually sometimes some people do sadly have to work a little bit harder than others, and do have to sort of overcome certain things that might be held against them through no fault of their own. And again, I'm not going to claim that I'm a victim in all of this. But to my mind, social mobility is about equality of opportunity. It's about valuing the different experiences that people can bring, and understanding that there is not a monopoly on one certain type of person that should make it within this profession. And so what I would say, regardless of your experience, and as you'll have heard, each of the four of us have very different experiences to speak about, but hopefully we demonstrate the fact, through that there is value in all of those, because it has dictated the way we have approached things, looked at things, and then hopefully it's brought something to the practices that we have. So I can't really think of anything more off the top of my head beyond what Ian was saying, for example, and Andrew and Gaynor, don't give up, take every opportunity that comes your way. And the other one that I think on a lighter note as well is to remind people also to have a hinterland, because it's very easy to become obsessed and to really internalize the difficulty that comes with trying to make it in this profession, that you lose sight of the other things in your life that are important. And so I do think it's important to enjoy other things and remain hopefully level-headed, and understand that yes, the bar is a terrific profession. It's a terrific profession for its own sake, but ultimately I'm doing this to work in something that interests me, but to help other people, but also so that so that I'm doing it for my family and hopefully family that is to come. So those are three things that I would leave you with, and obviously welcome any questions. Thank
you, Jack. So I've been keeping an eye on the chat. I don't see anything at the moment. Does any? Oh, something's just popped in. I'm just going to have a look. Okay. The world is changing. So, okay, question for us all. The world is changing very fast now, so maybe there are less prejudice and more opportunities for young barristers seeking pupillage. Does anyone want to respond to that?
I would like to just take a really quick point on that. The world is changing, things are different. I had no idea that other organisations other than chambers can do pupillages, as I've mentioned. There is also another thing which isn't spoken about at these things often enough, and that's once you've received your BPTC, you can do a course with SILEX, the Chartered Institute of Legal Executives, and you can qualify as a solicitor and eventually come back to the bar anyway. There's so many things that you could be doing to bump up your CV, to make you look more interested, more well-rounded. And I absolutely agree. I know barristers who before were ballet dancers, who were chefs. Like me, I've had a million different jobs. The more you do with your life, and as Jack mentioned Hinterland, the more interesting a person you are, the more chance you have of a pupillage. People, chambers, organisations are taking far more interest in people who are diverse people, who can talk about more than just the law, who can talk about hobbies, who have got other things going on in their lives. So definitely the world is changing.
I think just to add my piece to that as well, I think what's still lacking is actually awareness and information. And what I mean by that is at all levels of the education process. So I think, as I say, I was lucky to go to a private school, but even then and there, information was lacking and guidance was lacking. So I think things have changed, but I'm not sure they've changed sufficiently quickly enough to have those opportunities open at the education level to the comprehensive sector, for example. I think the private school still is quite a big source of, potential barristers, potential vocational qualifications of that ilk. So I think that's a big thing that I would feel that we would continue to need to push more awareness and information, but also awareness of bias. So I think that everyone who is, interviewing or bringing people through this process needs to be aware of their own possible unconscious bias, and be open to all kinds of backgrounds, not just the traditional backgrounds. And that just takes time. That's education. And that just takes time to change. So I think that's an important thing as well. But for sure, things are changing, but there's still an awful long way to go, in my view.
I think you're on mute, Ian, and I'll come in.
I was going to say, on the one hand, that techniques to recruit and to select pupils probably has improved. Lots of organisations are developing inclusive hiring policies and practices. Some chambers, and I know the Government Legal Department does blind recruitment process, so that people to try and overcome some of the unconscious bias and prejudice that everyone has. On the other hand, yesterday I attended a anti-racism webinar, and I was quite shocked at hearing the amount of racism that's going on in all levels of society. And I've also seen homophobia and other prejudices on the increase. So, I think some things are doing well, but on the other hand, there are also still problems there. But if you want to be a barrister, I think you have to persevere, and don't let that put you off.
I think from my point of view, pupillage obviously isn't so distant in my memory, so I'm not involved in pupillage recruitment, but I am involved with bar course scholarships, and it's amazing that the differences you see in different people's experiences. There really is a huge variety, and I think that the way you present that information is very useful in terms of helping you along the way. But of course, as Andrew says, you know, if you've got nobody that actually can sit down and sort of talk you through how you put together an application or what are the sorts of things to say or how to frame it, it can be very difficult working out those tricks, and it only comes with sort of, you know, years of practice and rejection that you start to cotton on to what exactly you're being asked. You know, I think as a general rule of thumb, what is a useful thing to do is, regardless of whatever the experience is, if you first of all, you know, set out briefly, describe what it is, give the evidence about what it is that you have done and what you have learned from that experience, and then thirdly, what you can use what you've learned from that experience and apply it to practice. I know, because I would have been guilty of this myself. Whenever you get a pupillage application, you've got to say the work experience section, you tend to just put down a few bullet points to describe what you did, and you assume that it's just self-evident what you've learned from that, because you're in a rush to get to the essay questions where you can, you know, sort of hopefully dazzle them with your prose. But actually, every section on your form is an opportunity to sell yourself. And the thing I say to people all the time, if you think of yourself as your own client, you're having to argue your case. So make every point as if you are selling, you know, somebody, selling somebody else, that somebody else just happens to be you. That might be a useful way of approaching it. And in terms of actually going about and saying, you know, how can you get help? I mean, there's no magic trick to get in a mentor or anything else. You come to events like this, you know, just go to other events, and if you don't ask, you don't get. You know, for the most part, we're hopefully, you know, if we're coming along to do these sorts of things, we're hopefully friendly and approachable. And if we don't have the time, we will tell you, but hopefully you won't be met completely with short shrift, and we can at least direct you to resources that might be useful. So don't be backwards and come in forwards.
Thanks, Jack. So I'm going to take, I know we've still got 9 minutes left, so I'm going to take 2 of the questions that have come through together, because I think they go to the same point, and that is about pupillages outside of the self-employed bar, outside of the chambers environment. So yes, the first comment around it's difficult to find out which law firms offer pupillages, agree. I think one of the things that we're finding is that in the commercial sector, and probably in law firms as well, but I certainly can speak for the commercial sector, there's not as many pupillages as we would like to be able to offer. And then that comes to the other question that's come through around, do BSB make it simple enough for organisations to become AETOs? And we have been discussing with the BSB how we can make that better, make that easier. There are some challenges. Or commercial organisations work in their own way. They have their own policies, they have their own procedures, and they also have their own timelines. So one of the key challenges is that, you know, commercial organisations will often have a role available, and they will have to fill that within a certain time frame, which does not always align with the pupillage time frame that would be on the relevant gateway. So there are definitely challenges. We're working with the BSB. I hope you and I'm okay to say that, to kind of try and overcome some of those challenges in the hope that we can get many more employed pupillages out there, because that would definitely be our ultimate goal.
I think Cassandra, our administrator, has got a list of pupillage providers, which, Sandra, I think you have. So we can put that with the slide.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, but my understanding was that all pupillages should be advertised on Gateway, even if they're not Gateway applications. So that should include employed positions as well. And I know from past experience, you can search and filter your search results. So hopefully that helps. As to the second point, I can't claim any expertise on the BSB, but trust is in good hands.
I just wanted to say that the other thing is with pupillages, they don't have to be called pupillages to count towards your 12 months. So I know lots of people who have done things like presenting officers for the Home Office, or have done work for the CPS, or have put cases together at law firms, or have taken a role in a law firm, and they've managed to ask the BSB to offset that time that they've spent against their pupillage. So if you could offset 6 months or 3 months, and you could go to a chambers and say, well, the Bar Standards Board just wants me to do another 6 or 9 months, then already you're way ahead. So don't forget that that's an option. Insofar as how do you find places that offer pupillages, I would say to you, go to www.gov.uk/DG Government Legal Department, and we advertise ours online. So that's the shameless plug for GLD.
But I think there have been difficulties with the new AETOs, because I do know of law firms that used to offer pupillages, but now it's become much more difficult to apply to be a pupil supervisor. So we are working with the BSB to try and make that easier, because the other thing is that, I mean, the bank that I work for does offer training contracts for solicitors, but because the Law Society and the BSB have different requirements, it's very difficult when you've only got a few trainee lawyers to manage 2 different training systems. So I think things could be done to make it easier.
And thank you, Michaela, for highlighting that it's possible to set up an alert on the gateway to allow you to be notified for new vacancies. I think that's really helpful. I wasn't aware of that.
And by the way, while we're waiting for another question, when you get the slide pack, you'll also find some slides at the back, which just give you an idea of what an employed barrister is, and the different career paths for employed barristers, both in the public and private sectors. So that'll be useful information to just make you aware of the different things. And I think it's true to say that if anybody's wants to just find out what's going on, then I'm sure any of us on this panel or contact Sandra at BACFI, and she'll put you in touch with a barrister that can give you some information.
If I could just take a quick 60 seconds just to tell you the benefits of being an employed barrister rather than a self-employed. You get regular salary. The beginning of your career is paid. Lots of barristers that are in the independent bar might not get paid for the first 6 months of their pupillage. There is access to training. There's access to a larger support network. You get paid holidays. You get paid parental leave. All of that, unfortunately, is lacking in the self-employed bar. In the employed bar, all of that is there. So there's pros and cons, and for me, the terms and conditions, the working conditions, whatever you like to call them, are much better in the employed bar. But everybody will find what suits them, I think.
Yeah, that's very true. And I think the variety and breadth of work in-house, I mean, over the years, I started off doing litigation and moved into doing commercial work, but I've got involved in some really interesting cases and projects. And also I found that when I first started practicing at the employed bar as a relatively newly qualified barrister, I was handling much bigger cases and quality of work than I would have been allowed in self-employed chambers. So the quality of work is definitely there. I was getting involved with, I mean, even when I was a legal assistant at a local authority, I actually led a case for to defend a judicial review application, and working with a silk. So that, so you can have some really exciting opportunities at the employed bar.
Thank you, Ian. So I'm conscious now we've got 2 minutes left. There's a couple of quite specific questions in the chat, so I think rather than take the time now to respond to those, I'm happy to take those offline. I think some of those are probably not in our gift to answer anyway, so we can take them offline. But I think if I was just going to try and wrap up, I think actually what's been quite interesting for me is just how many things in common we've all had in terms of the things we've struggled with. And I would say probably the key message that I've taken away is don't give up, don't be disheartened. If you're dedicated enough and you're capable and you're tenacious, then you will find the right path for you. Try different things. It doesn't have to be pupillage in the first instance. Try different things. And then otherwise, yeah, thank you so much for all of our speakers joining us tonight, and thank you everyone who's asked a question. Thank you, Sandra, for putting everything together, doing all the organising. And please, if you've got any questions or ideas for future events, things you want to hear us talk about, or you're not a member of BACFI and would like to be, then just get in touch with us. The contact details are on the flyer for this event tonight, so do take a look. Thank you all for joining. Thank you again to the speakers, and have a great evening.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. Best of luck.
Yeah, good luck, everyone.
Thank you. Don't give up. You belong.
Exactly.
Good luck, everyone.
Good luck.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.